All right, everyone, it is about that time. Welcome to the AARP Florida Disaster Preparedness webinar series. I'm your host, Jamie Champion Monjovi. I'm Communications Manager at AARP Florida. And during this 2021 hurricane season, we're bringing you interviews with subject matter experts in their field. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Remember, you can submit questions through the chat feature and the Q&A function on your platform menu. Our moderators will be sending your questions, and we'll get to as many as we can toward the end of our discussion. I'll ask our moderators to ensure that any resources, websites, or information discussed is available for you in the chat. Our guest today is Robert Boyeta, the Alert Coordinator Meteorologist for the NOAA National Weather Service office in Miami. Mr. Boyeta works on all aspects of hurricane forecasting, from assisting hurricane forecasters with data collection to writing active storm forecasts, conducting interviews with local and national media, as well as briefing local officials on the expected storm. This is a very timely topic as hurricane season is definitely heating up, and we've just had impacts from Tropical Storm Fred pass through the panhandle of Florida, and Hurricane Grace is on the horizon. I'd like to ask if Robert could give us a quick update on any storms that are swirling around before we get started with Q&A. Welcome, Robert.
All right. Yes. Hi, Jamie. Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be part of this webinar. It's a quick update. We have Hurricane Grace down in the Caribbean Sea. It's near Grand Cayman, so it's down in the Northwest Caribbean Sea. The main thing for Florida, at least, is that we're not expected to feel any impacts from Grace. Grace is moving westward, and it's expected to make landfall in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico sometime tomorrow, and then continue westward, move into the southern Gulf, and eventually make landfall once again on the east coast of Mexico this weekend. So it's certainly a threat for Mexico, but not for Florida. Now, we also have Tropical Storm Henri, which is south of Bermuda, and that's moving generally westward, at least over the next couple of days, and it is expected to gradually make a turn to the north and then northeast. So again, for Florida, no impacts, no threats from Henri. It could be a threat down the road for perhaps parts of New England or maybe the eastern provinces of Canada. That's possible. But again, for Florida right now, we have no threats from tropical systems, and we don't see any threats for at least the next week or so.
Well, that's definitely good news. So let's just
Absolutely.
get started with some of the basics. Can you tell us a little bit about the mission of the National Weather Service and the National Hurricane Center?
Well, the National Weather Service mission is to protect lives and property through accurate and timely weather and water forecasts, and that also includes the providing information to everyone. Again, in a timely and accurate fashion. It's our forecasts and our warnings. So the reason why we exist, the reason why we work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is to monitor the weather, whether it's local storms like tornadoes and thunderstorms, to things like hurricanes, blizzards, whatever it might be across the country. Our job is to monitor those weather systems and issue warnings for the protection of life and property.
Perfect. Yeah, most of us who live in Florida are very aware of hurricane season, which spans June 1 through November 31 of each year. What are some of the risks related to tropical storms and hurricanes, and what is the difference between the two?
Well, the difference between tropical storm and hurricane is really wind speed. Tropical storms are tropical systems in which the maximum sustained winds within that system is between 39 and 73 miles an hour. When those maximum sustained winds reach 74 miles an hour, then it becomes a hurricane. So that's the distinction between a tropical storm and hurricane. Is really about the wind speed. Now, when we talk about the different hazards associated with tropical storms and hurricanes, certainly wind is one of them, and it's a big one. And obviously, the threat from the wind from a hurricane is much greater than it is from a tropical storm. Now, having said that, tropical storm force winds are still dangerous, but in a relative sense, hurricane force winds are obviously more dangerous, and the higher those winds get, the more that damage potential is from that wind speed, and it actually increases exponentially. So, where a lot of us are familiar with the categories, with the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale, and that's the category 1 to 5, and that's again just pertaining to the wind speeds alone. So the higher you go up on the scale, the much greater damage potential from the wind. Now, we also have to keep in mind that there are other hazards associated with tropical storms and hurricanes, and actually ones that tropical storms and hurricanes have in common. For example, rainfall. Rainfall and flooding from that flooding caused by that rainfall can be just as bad or even worse in tropical storms than in hurricanes. The rainfall flooding aspect of these systems is not as directly tied to the wind as it is with other things. So in other words, tropical storms can bring devastating flooding to areas, just as bad, if not worse, than with a hurricane moving over that same area, and the rainfall patterns associated with those. The tornadoes also is very similar. Tornadoes can occur. A lot of tropical storms can be prolific tornado producers just as much as hurricanes can. So again, those hazards are not directly related to the wind speed. The other one, which is a big one, and we're going to talk more about here, is storm surge. Now, storm surge is more directly related to wind. In other words, the stronger the wind, the more potential storm surge in a given location. That's, storm surge is caused by the wind, the force of the wind, you know, causing the water level in the ocean to rise, to increase ahead of that storm making landfall. And then, of course, that rise in the water will also move onshore. So think of it as kind of like a storm tide, really, is what it is. So there is certainly a relationship between a wind speed and the amount of storm surge you can get. However, there are some areas, especially in the Gulf Coast of the United States, where even a tropical storm can produce quite a bit of storm surge. So again, we don't want people to think, well, it's a tropical storm, it's no big deal. Or as the director of the Hurricane Center, Ken Graham says, it's just a tropical storm. We don't want to think of them as just a tropical storm. Tropical storms bring their own sets of hazards and threats that we certainly have to take very seriously.
Absolutely. That's great advice, and interesting to know that storm surge is a risk with both. Very good to know. So we know there are preparations that have to take place each year to ensure the safety of our family, home, and property. What preparations should start when a tropical storm or hurricane watch is issued, and what should be completed by the time that moves to a warning stage? And if you can just start with the definition of the two, watch versus warning, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Watch means that tropical storm or hurricane conditions are possible within 48 hours anywhere in the area that's under watch. A warning means that hurricane or tropical storm conditions are expected somewhere in that warning area within 36 hours. So that's the difference. Watch is for the possibility over a longer time frame. Warning, is a higher level of certainty that it's going to occur somewhere within that warning area within a shorter period of time. So really, when it comes to preparation, when there's a watch means, okay, we need to start at least putting our preparedness plans in motion. Uh, Depending on the area that we live in, that could mean potential evacuations, depending on when those orders are issued by local officials. But outside of that, it means start getting your things together. Well, of course, we should already have a hurricane plan in place, right? A hurricane plan before the season starts. So then when storms threaten us and we go under a watch, then that's when, okay, we need to make sure, okay, we need to start to implement that plan. That means making sure that we have the food, water, medicines, things that we're going to need, supplies that we're going to need for, several days or even a few weeks, depending on the time frame that we're talking about here potentially. It also means being ready to evacuate if you live in an evacuation zone and you're ordered to evacuate. So in other words, depending on the time that you have, it could mean being ready to start putting your shutters or window protection, if that's the case for your home or your residence. For example, I know depending for employers, for businesses, that could be the time when they're going to start to again implement their hurricane plan, give people time to, to secure their homes, secure their families. A lot of decisions are made at the local level when it comes to things like schools, infrastructure, businesses, etc. So yeah, the watch puts a lot of these things in motion. There's already things going on before the watch, but the watch formalizes it, and of course, brings a higher level of urgency to the situation.
Sure. Well, that's very helpful. And so what exactly triggers an evacuation order and which areas are evacuated first? What's the process for that?
Well, the evacuation zones, for example, just I guess to kind of start big and then bring it down, detailed as possible. The uh, every county has every coastal county has evacuation zones, and those evacuation zones are determined based on the storm surge threat in those areas. So in other words, there is a storm surge model that local officials and in concert with the National Weather Service in their area, they coordinate, and they look at the information, and then local officials will determine, the evacuation zones based on the level of vulnerability, level of threat. So every county has different zones, different levels that they have. So it's hard to generalize. But for example, let's say, for example, a county has 5 evacuation zones that they determined. Let's say they call them Zone A, Zone B, C, D, and E. Typically, Zone A would be the one that's most vulnerable. That's the area under Zone A is most vulnerable to storm surge. And then as you go to B, C, D, and E, your vulnerability decreases, but there's still some risk, even for example, people that might be in Zone E. Have a lower risk, but still have some risk depending on the type of storm, the category of the storm, and the motion of the storm towards that area. So there's a lot of factors that are included. So when there's an active storm out there, and then that storm begins to approach the area or get close, then we start to actually incorporate that storm's information directly into those storm surge models, and then the storm surge models give data or provide data that then local officials can use, again in coordination with the National Weather Service, to determine what areas need to be evacuated. In other words, which zones they need to implement for the evacuation orders, and then the timing of when they should be ordered. Again, and the timing depends on each individual location, how many people need to be moved or need to be evacuated. That could range anywhere from a couple of days or even a few days to 12 or 18 hours, depending on the size of the community and the roads and all the evacuation routes leading out from that area.
Sure. That's such important information to have. I think that at this point, I just want to pause and remind our audience to submit questions in the Q&A feature or in the chat. We're monitoring both of those, and we're going to get to those very soon. Robert, how important is it to heed an evacuation order in a timely manner?
Yeah, it's really important that everyone heeds the evacuation orders, because storm surge is the leading killer in hurricanes, not just in the U.S., but really worldwide. If you look back over whatever 20, 30, 40 more years, more people die from the water, from the storm surge, than from any other part of the storm. And actually, I think it's like 49%, almost 50% of deaths in hurricanes that are directly caused by the storm are caused by storm surge. So that right there underscores the importance of heeding those evacuation orders. So yeah, if you're, that's why, the number one thing in a hurricane plan should be, do I live in an evacuation zone?
Sure.
And if I do, know which one I live in, which zone it is. You can, you can go to your county's website and get that information, and then certainly heed that order, and be ready to heed the order. Again, if a storm is approaching and maybe watches are going to be issued, that's right around the time when, these evacuation orders might be issued by local officials.
Sure. So can I be ordered to evacuate even if I don't live in a flood zone or one of the zones that you've mentioned?
Yeah. If you live outside of any of those evacuation zones, uh, you will, in all likely, or most likely, not be ordered to evacuate. The only exception would be mobile home parks. So, for example, people who live in mobile home parks may be ordered to evacuate because of the wind threat. That's the only, the only exception to the evacuations. Being primarily for storm surge as well. Of course, mobile homes are more vulnerable to lower wind speeds, so therefore, in many communities, they will order evacuations of mobile home parks just because of the wind, even if there is no flood threat.
Okay. Okay, excellent. Thank you for that extra information. Right now, I'd love to go to our audience. We have a question from Kathleen, wanting to know if there's any type of mobile app that you would recommend or that we could download, possibly a NOAA app, to stay in touch during hurricane season and get the latest news.
Yeah. Well, the National Weather Service has a mobile version of our website. So if you go to mobile.weather.gov and on your mobile device, you can actually save that website onto your home screen. So it acts like an app basically, where you can just push the button on your screen, and you'll get the forecast for your area. You can even bookmark your exact location on the website there, and then when you call it up, it'll always reference your home location. Uh, when it comes to being alerted for severe weather, for example, hurricane, tropical storm watches and warnings, or any other types of weather alerts that are pushed out to us and we receive on our mobile devices, there are many apps out there that actually do a very good job of alerting us. One of them is FEMA. FEMA has a really good weather alerting app functionality. So there's only one FEMA app. So download the FEMA app on your mobile device, and there's a function there where you can actually set up a push notifications for your county or for any county you designate, and that way you'll get all severe weather alerts, including things like hurricane watches, hurricane warnings, and even storm surge watches and storm surge warnings. Now, there are many, many apps out there, but I just wanted to mention FEMA's because FEMA is a free app. There's no fee. You just subscribe once, and it works pretty well.
Okay. All right, great. Do you happen to know, this is an anonymous question that we received, how often we've had category 4 and 5 hurricanes hit the Gulf Coast of Florida in the last 50 or so years?
I don't have the exact number on that, but what I can say, or at least kind of maybe be a little more general with, is as far as the frequency of categories threes, fours, or fives uh, coming, let's say within 50 miles of a certain part of the coastline, the highest frequency is in Southeast Florida and the Keys. I believe the frequency is like once every, I think it's every 15 years or something like that.
Mhm.
Now, again, we're talking major hurricane landfalls primarily here. Now that Florida in general has the highest frequency or the highest number of major hurricane landfalls of any state, of any state in the country. Florida is the most hurricane prone state when you take it, as a whole from north to south. So, a major hurricane landfall in your or near your area is not common. Obviously, it may happen once in a generation, perhaps, or but if you live in Florida long enough, sooner or later, the odds are you are going to face, if not, face a pretty significant threat, or maybe even get directly hit by a hurricane or even a major hurricane. We've had several. We've had Hurricane Michael in
Right.
2018 in the Florida Panhandle. We had Hurricane Irma
Yeah.
in 2017. We had, again, I'm just going off the top of my head here.
Yeah.
We had
That's
Hurricane Gene in 2004. We had Hurricane Wilma in 2005. Hurricane Andrew in 1992. So go far back. Go far enough back. We can. The number of major hurricane landfalls in Florida start to add up. So yeah, we are in a very hurricane-prone state, and it's just something that we have to be ready for.
Absolutely. As a 20+ year resident of the state, I can vouch for that. We've definitely been through our share of hurricanes.
Mhm.
And I do remember the aftermath of Andrew was just was horrific. So thank you so much. Can you recommend, first of all, if you could give us kind of like the top 5 to 10 list of supplies for your disaster kit? And then do you happen to know if bottled water can be stored? This is a question from one of our members of the audience. If we need to renew that every year, or can, do we need to toss it and buy new bottled water, or is that something that lasts like for multiple years?
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer this question more, I guess, on a personal level, not as an
Mhm.
expert. As someone who lives in Florida, of course, I have to go through all the same preparation that it, as everyone else.
Right.
Um, I would there are a lot of good websites out there that have nice comprehensive lists of what are some of the things that we should have to be ready for hurricanes. I know there's a ready.gov is a good website. Uh, the Red Cross website is also really good. American Red Cross. I think it's redcross.org if I'm not mistaken. Florida Disaster .org, I believe. In other words, that's the Florida Division of Emergency Management's website. FEMA.gov has good information as well. So I could think of several things right off the top of my head. We're talking food, of course, food that's not going to spoil. The food that doesn't require refrigeration.
Right.
Uh, Bottled water, you mentioned bottled water. Medicine, your
Sure.
medications, definitely you want to make sure you have enough of those for maybe for a couple weeks or more.
Yeah, and of course,
Battery,
yeah,
yeah,
batteries, flashlight, weather radio,
yep,
a NOAA radio if you have one. I think those are all
absolutely,
great things to add to the list. And AARP Florida has a dedicated hurricane disaster preparedness website with resources listed there. We'll put that in the chat for you, the link to our page where you can print off checklists to build your own disaster kit. Hopefully, at this point, most
right.
people have done that since we are in the throes of hurricane season now. But I know that's something that's always good to be thinking about. Um,
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I want to make sure I answer the question about the bottled water.
yes,
Uh, you know, and
yeah,
uh, whenever I buy bottled water, I look for an expiration date. I believe usually the bottled waters come like in a plastic wrapping, or maybe in a box. If not in the box, somewhere in the wrapping or in the box, there will be an expiration date.
yeah,
And just from the top, just from my memory, it's usually a year or maybe 2 years, something like that. So in other words, you can keep bottled water for more than a hurricane season. But certainly when you buy that, when you buy it, check the date on it. Maybe write it somewhere. Maybe like on the side of the packaging so that you know when that water expires.
right. So do you believe, since we are obviously not only struggling with hurricane season, but also, we're currently in a global pandemic, and, families, as they're thinking about, the best places to potentially evacuate or shelter, that emergency kit or the materials that they take with them might look a little different. What is your recommendation about, personally, just for hand sanitizer or masks or things that you might think to bring with you in our current situation?
Yeah, well, I know just from being in contact with emergency managers, when it comes to things like evacuation shelters, yeah, basically you have to bring everything that you're going to need. They're only those shelters only provide you a safe haven from the
Mhm.
storm. They're not gonna have beds for you. They're not gonna have a concierge service or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, I mean, so yes, of course, a big part of that, as you mentioned, is our sanitation. Things that we're gonna need for sanitation: masks, uh, hand sanitizer, wipes, whatever it is that we're gonna need. We'll make sure that you have to make sure that you have uh, a good stock of those. So if you do need to evacuate, and if you're going to go to a shelter, that you have all that information, and always follow the advice of the staff that's working there at the shelter. They're going to have all the information. They're going to be able to answer questions that you might have. But certainly plan on bringing all those things with you if you need to go to a shelter.
Absolutely. Great advice. So I just want to loop back to something that I think you covered earlier, but we're still getting questions about it. So for our audience, I want to make sure we cover it again. Can you explain the difference between evacuation zones and flood zones one more time?
Okay, yeah, I think when we think of flood zones, I think we're thinking of the FEMA flood zones. You know, the ones that that we pay insurance on. Those flood zones are primarily from rainfall flooding. So, and those, of course, those are important to be aware of. But the storm evacuation zones are based on the storm surge threat, which is primarily or highest near coastal, near large bodies of water, like for example, the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico. Also, large bays. For example, in South Florida, there's Biscayne Bay. There's other bodies of water, Appalachia Bay, Tampa Bay, for example. All those bodies of water are highly prone to big storm surges, and the areas that are adjacent to those water areas are the ones that are most at risk. Now, in some parts of the Florida, especially on the Gulf Coast, but also in other parts of the state, the storm surge has the potential of penetrating several miles inland, depending on the size of the storm and the exact track of the storm. So, just because we don't live right next to the water doesn't mean that we're not under threat from storm surge. But yeah, there are two different things. So, the flood zone is primarily rainfall, is based on the risk of rainfall flooding in your area. But the storm surge is, in this, in kind of what we talked about earlier, is high, high water basically, or a very high storm tide that moves inland and
Mhm.
can move, and that's really the most dangerous part of the storm. So it's important to know the difference, and again, know whether you live in that evacuation zone from storm surge.
Absolutely. No, no, that's great. And I want to remind everyone that AARP Florida has dedicated hurricane preparedness resources on our website to help you prepare and stay safe during hurricane season, including a menu of educational videos and animations that we just released this year regarding generator safety, how to prepare your home, and when to evacuate. And the information to access all of that is in our chat. Can you, for a couple final questions for you, Robert, what type of communication exists between the National Weather Service, the National Hurricane Center, media, and local officials, and how does everyone collaborate and work together when we're facing an emergency situation or a natural disaster?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and we maintain close contact with emergency managers, local officials, and media year round. So in other words, it's not just something where, where we get to know each other when a storm is threatening us. We have relationships with all of our local media, with the different local officials, emergency managers, and other big decision makers, in each of our communities and counties and cities, and that's critical. In fact, I would say that's something a lot of people may not realize, because it kind of happens behind the scenes, but that's really what drives the level of preparedness and the level of awareness that we all have. Being able to have a consistent message. So in other words, when there's a storm threatening, just to give an example, when it's even before the season, we do hurricane exercises and drills that we participate in collaboration with local officials, in order to get their staff and really the community ready for hurricane season. We have meetings with them and workshops with them throughout the year. So all that is so that we're ready, so that when a storm does threaten, then we provide special briefings directly to our emergency managers as well as to our media partners, so that we can all communicate and collaborate on, for example, okay, what is the threat to our area from this particular storm, and also what are the common points that we need to communicate, so that everyone gets a consistent message from not just the National Weather Service, but also from the local officials and also from the people, the media on TV and radio, who, so in other words, we call it the integrated warning team. That integrated warning team, if we're communicating the information in a consistent fashion that reduces, it reduces misinformation. It reduces, the chance of someone hearing one thing from one official source and then another thing from another source. In other words, we need to be on the same page, especially when it comes to, you know, potential major impacts like a hurricane or a tropical storm.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Robert, for joining us today. This has been so helpful. Is there anything you'd like to add, anything we didn't cover that you'd like to share with our audience?
Just to reiterate, and we're approaching the peak of hurricane season. The peak of hurricane season in the entire Atlantic is September. However, for Florida, though, this is a statistic that often surprises people. And this maybe applies more to South Florida, but I think it's also equally important for other parts of the state. The month in which we've been hit the most by hurricanes in at least the southern part of the state is October, not September. September, of course, is like a close second. But what we're trying to say here is that October is a month that we still are very much prone to being hit by storms. Hurricane Michael, the Category 5 hurricane in 2018, that was in October. It hit the Panhandle. So any part of the state is vulnerable to hurricanes in Florida, even well into October. So, we don't want people to think, well, if we get past September and there haven't been any storms that have affected our area, it doesn't mean that we're off the hook. We still have to be very much prepared for the rest of the season, October and November, but especially October, being the month in which we've been hit the most by hurricanes. So, we have some good websites, weather.gov, for weather information for your specific location. Hurricanes.gov is the specific website for the National Hurricane Center, where you can get your latest hurricane track forecasts and other data that's there as well. So it's really important to stay informed with those via those sources, and always, as a final point, make sure that you get your information from official sources. Official sources means, of course, not just the National Weather Service, but your local officials, city, county, state, and also the media. Like I mentioned before, we're coordinating very closely behind the scenes to make sure that all those sources are providing the official, most accurate information possible to everyone out there.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you, Robert. Remember that AARP is working to protect adults 50 and older by ensuring that they have the most important information during this important season. And for more resources on disaster preparedness, you can visit the AARP Hurricane Preparedness website at aarp.org/Florida/FL disaster help. And that's in the chat for you. This concludes our session. We hope everyone found this information helpful. Thank you for joining us, and look out for future AARP Florida event offerings throughout hurricane season, and stay safe out there. Thanks, Robert. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.